Hello, fairy finders and fairy seekers. Welcome to FaerieQuest and another episode of Real Fairies in Real Photos. This is part 3 of the High Bridge Disc Golf Course at Memorial Park in Eldora, Iowa, where I took the photographs on September 25th, 2022. This is a location that just keeps on giving. We will still have a few more parts here. I went through about 25 more photos out of the 116 and chose 10 photos that had what I thought were the best fairies to share with you. When you're looking at these photographs, I've pointed out or encircled the fairy that I'm speaking about or that I've enlarged for you, but you may actually find other fairies in the photos that I'm not pointing out to you. I've found them, but I chose the one that I'm sharing. So if you want to find more fairies, most of these photos have other ones in them as well. So before we get started, use your magic wand to zap that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider supporting this channel using the link in the description box below. I would be so appreciative. Okay, let's check out these fairies. This fairy must have formed herself from the leaves around her, which is why she is perfectly blended with no color variance. We can see her eyes, nose, and hair clearly, but her body is a bit more difficult to see. It seems clearer in the photo to the left, allowing us to possibly see one arm and one leg, but she is walking amongst the leaves, so it is really hard to tell for sure. I almost missed this one. Once in a while, I have to share fairies with you that are nearly invisible and or ghost-like. This is one of them. At first glance, this fairy looks to be part of the rock, but when you look closely, you can see that his head is lifted away from the rock. You can also see eyes, nose, cheekbones, and a mouth. I believe that he is holding a child on his left side as we look at him, but the child is much harder to see. Perhaps he is using most of his energy to shield the child, which is why we can see him more clearly. Here we have a fairy that reminds me of an anime character. He has a tall black hat and a black jacket or shirt, and he is looking over his shoulder at us. His flesh-colored face gave him away. The one eye that we can see clearly is what gave the anime impression. We can also see a nose and a mouth. The rest of him is behind the clump of leaves, but he gave us a good glimpse of himself. This photo had several fairies to share. The arrow in the photo on the left points to a very obvious fairy. We can see her hair, eyes, and hand. Part of her face is split by a leaf and stem, but she's hard to miss. The other fairies can be seen in the red box and also above. These two were a little harder to see, which is why I cropped them. We have what looks like a beast type fairy talking to a more human-looking fairy. The one labeled fairy is wearing a hat, and though he is blurry, we can see both eyes, a nose, an ear, and his neck. The beast fairy is quite clear, though his facial features are blended. This little fairy is blended quite well into the leaves and shadows. We can see her hat, which reminds me of a mushroom, and her face with both eyes and a nose. Her mouth is hidden behind her hands. She looks to have very thick eyelashes as her eyes stand out, even though she appears to be a bit faded due to her blending ability. She looks to be a youngster, but it really is hard to tell with the Fae. Here we have another fairy that is nearly invisible. This one looks to be part animal and part people. The animal part appears in the body and tail. The people part in the face and the hair on the head. This fairy being does have wings too. It appears to have stopped to rest for a bit, with its front part resting on a rock and its back end resting against a tree. All that we can see of this fairy is his head. He looks like he ducked down behind the rock, and the wood in the foreground on the bridge has covered his ear and behind his head. He is wearing a hat, and we can see both eyes, his nose, his mouth, and a chin. He might have a goatee. He's pretty clear despite his attempt to hide behind the rock, and the leaf on his face did not cover anything we needed to identify him. It is so nice occasionally to be able to see a fairy from head to toe. This one is wearing a hat, a cape that falls to about the back of the knees, and boots. His facial features are not clear, but we can see one eye and the shape of a nose. I am amazed that I was able to enlarge him without a lot of blur in the cropped photo above. Compare him to the size of the leaves in the left photo and you'll understand why. This is one of those photos that makes for a very convincing argument that fairies really do exist. I wasn't sure it was necessary to label this one, but the hat is a bit faded into the rock. I believe that this is a leprechaun, or at least the head of a leprechaun. His hat is green and has a dark ribbon above the brim. The hat is usually the giveaway with a leprechaun. We can see his face very clearly and his ear. A leaf is hiding part of his mouth, but there is still no mistaking that the mouth is there. We can even see part of his lower lip. He looks like he may be either going into the rock or coming out of the rock. Oh, the magic! The heads in the middle of nowhere really throw me for a loop. Always I consider that these fairies may be scouting the location and don't want to bring all of themselves in until they know it is safe. Or they can magically drop straight down into the earth if they sense danger. We can see this fairy's eyes, nose, and mouth clearly. He even has a kind of mole on his forehead above his nose. Not sure if we are seeing hair on his head or a hat or both. Once in a while, we get lucky and discover two fairies interacting with one another. Here it looks like we have a girl facing us with hands on her hips as though impatient about something. Then we see the other fairy with yellow hair or hat walking toward her. This fairy has on a cape and is carrying a brown satchel. I wonder if the girl fairy has been waiting a while or the other fairy is moving too slowly. We can only guess. I believe this is a baby troll or similar species that resembles the troll dolls or wishnik dolls that our kids play with. It is a cute little thing, even with its big dark eyes and pale face. It has very black hair and pointed ears. The foot kind of looks like a duck's foot, but it was obviously moving, blurred, when I took this photo. I also believe that its mom was behind it in the photo. I have marked her with a red arrow in the larger picture to the left. You can see her eyes and part of her nose. This picture is just a bit of Halloween fun, since Halloween is only 15 days away. It is amazing what nature can do, creating things that we recognize. Here we have a gold strand of tinsel attached to a leaf, and it looks like an arm and a hand. The leaf even has the thumb and forefingers, with the middle finger being the longest. This hand is crawling across the leaves and has a bit of a Halloween creep factor. This was one of those that I just couldn't not share. This is an interesting fairy photo. Again, we have a head, and only a head, coming out of the leaves. This fairy looks to be wearing a helmet, very domed and quite shiny. We can see his eyes, nose, and mouth very clearly, and also a very pointed beard. He may also have a mustache, as it looks a bit extra fuzzy between his nose and mouth. I am becoming more and more convinced that this is how they scout to make sure a location is safe to enter. This fairy may have had a previous bad encounter, which is maybe why he is wearing a helmet. Just a guess. This fairy is quite clear. He is wearing a squarish type hat, a long coat that comes down to his knees, and what looks to be a comfortable walking shoe. We can see his face in profile. It is obvious that he has lifted his leg to step over something, which must be what most of the walks these fairies take is like, since they are so very small. Check him out in comparison to the leaves. This fairy stuck out for me in this photo. He is sitting on a moss-covered rock wearing what looks like a rain cape and a rain hat. It is the shininess of the material that makes me think it is a rain slicker. He has his face turned toward us, looking over his shoulder. The features are not super clear, but we can make out one eye, the nose, and a mouth. I believe there is also some hair to the right of the face about shoulder length. I have been saying he, but this fairy could also be a girl.